June 1944, Camp Hearn, Texas. Dawn had not yet come. The mist clung to the barbed wire fence like the cold breath of some enormous creature. Wind slipped through the wooden posts, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and coal smoke from a distant kitchen, an unfamiliar scent none of the prisoners quite dared to believe was real. Inside the dim barrack, 27 German women startled awake as the sound of hobnailed boots struck the gravel outside. An American voice barked, short and sharp. "Offstein, line up outside." Anna Weiss, 23 years old, once a telegraph operator in Normandy, trembled as she pulled the thin blanket around her. Her eyes were still heavy with sleep and fear. She looked around. The others were pale as ghosts. Someone whispered, "This is the hour of execution." No one answered. The iron door creaked open, the sound like chains dragging across stone. A few women clasped hands, lips moving in German prayers. Outside, the dawn fog was thick and colorless, as if the world itself had been drained of light. The boots kept marching, steady, indifferent, each step a countdown. Breath quickened in the damp, cold air. A lone bird cried out, then fell silent. Anna felt her heart pounding painfully in her chest. She drew a deep breath and whispered one final plea. "Father, please don't let me die in the hands of the enemy." And then, the door burst wide open, light flooded in. They thought they were about to see the firing squad. Instead, came the smell of toast and the crackle of eggs frying on a pan. The first light of Texas slipped quietly through the window bars, spreading across the damp stains on the wooden wall. In the corner, Anna Weiss still could not believe what she had just witnessed. The scent of bread, of eggs, of something so ordinary. But fear had taken such deep root in her that she no longer trusted the ordinary. Every sense in her screamed, "No, it's a trap." The night before, as darkness settled over the camp, they had been ordered to pack their things. An American officer appeared, list in hand, and told the group of female prisoners to prepare for a transfer. But in their minds, those words, transfer order, meant something else, a move toward execution. No one spoke aloud. Only glances met in silence. At Hearn, the rumor had spread for weeks. To the east, prisoners are killed at dawn. Quick, clean, no witnesses. No one knew where the story began, but in war, fear often carries more credibility than truth. Anna remembered the tales whispered in Berlin, and the ones traded over the radio in Normandy, that the Americans didn't take women prisoners, they handled them differently. The phrase had 1,000 dark meanings in her mind. She looked around the narrow barrack. The weak flame of an oil lamp flickered over hollow faces. Inge, the nurse from Munich, clutching a small cross so tightly it left a mark on her palm. Frida, once an electrician, trembling uncontrollably, and Gertrude, the oldest, sitting still with her eyes closed as though waiting for a sentence to be read. "It will be quick," Inge murmured, voice breaking. "Better than humiliation." No one replied, but Anna knew they agreed. The silence in the room was thick as fog. Outside, dogs barked in the distance. The iron gate creaked. Then came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate, pressing against the gravel. Anna found herself holding her breath with every step. She remembered that morning in Caen when she was captured. The Americans bursting in, rifles aimed at her chest. They didn't fire, only gestured for her to kneel. But from that moment on, she believed the war and her life had both ended. Every day since at Camp Hearn felt only like a postponement of the inevitable. The door flew open. A tall figure filled the frame. The Texan guard, Corporal David Hall, spoke in a deep, rough voice. "Line up outside. Now." He didn't shout. he didn't threaten, but something in that tone froze the air. To Anna, the words sounded like the toll of a funeral bell. The women began to move, slowly, dreamlike. Footsteps scraped against the floorboards. Bed chains rattled, a door bumped shut, and then, clang! A metal cup dropped, sharp as the crack of a gunshot. Anna wrapped her scarf around her neck, not for warmth, but to hide the trembling. She knew she had committed no crime in particular, but war had taught her one lesson. People do not need a reason to kill their enemies. She glanced toward the window. The fog was milky white, covering the camp and its watchtowers. A thin blade of light cut across the sky, cold and metallic. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else stared at the ground. As the line began to move toward the yard, Anna could hear her own heartbeat pounding so hard it blurred her hearing. Each step felt like a countdown. In her mind, she saw Dresden, her mother in the back garden, hanging white linens to dry, the smell of dark rye bread baking in the kitchen. A memory so tender it hurt, and then, like all tenderness, it dissolved into the gray mist. A click, the sound of a weapon loading. Someone exhaled sharply, almost a sob. Anna turned only to see a guard adjusting the strap of his rifle. But to the women, that small motion felt like the trigger's pull. No one spoke. They simply walked one by one into the cold, open yard. The barbed wire glistened with dew, sharp as knives under the pale dawn. Across the muddy ground, the tire marks of supply trucks looked like dried veins of blood. Anna took her place in line. She saw Frida beside her, lips pressed tight, whispering, "If they shoot, don't scream. Die in silence. That's the German way." Anna nodded. She wasn't sure she could scream, even if she tried. A strong wind swept across the yard, carrying dust and the faint scent of burning wood. For a moment, she glimpsed figures moving in the distance. Tall silhouettes, sleeves rolled up, heads bent over something unseen. No firing squad, no rifles raised, only smoke, rising gently. And a smell. That smell again. Rich, warm, alive, impossible. Anna staggered back, heart hammering. Surely they were burning bodies, or cooking something before the executions. But then, through the haze, a figure emerged from the wooden mess hall. A man holding a frying pan, his apron smeared with grease, a cook's cap tilted over his brow. She couldn't understand. She couldn't make herself understand. Everything in her mind collapsed. The Texan guard, the same one who had ordered "line up," now stood before them, gesturing with a half-smile. "Come on, ladies, breakfast's waiting." Anna stood frozen, her whole body strung tight as wire. She couldn't believe him. Breakfast? For us? She looked to Frida, who only stared, mouth open, unable to speak. Inge, the one who had prayed, began to sob softly, but she walked forward as if bewitched. Gravel crunched underfoot. The sound of frying filled the air again. Eggs hissing in butter. The smell of toast and melted fat mingled with the cold morning mist, and something inside Anna's chest twisted. A part of her still screamed that this was cruelty, that the Americans wanted to break them by offering something they could never truly have. But another part, the part still human, still fragile, felt only warmth. She suddenly remembered what her father once told her. "You'll know the war is over, not when the guns fall silent, but when people share a meal, again." And there, in the strange Texas morning, those words rose in her mind like a human. The morning wind slipped through the rows of wooden posts, carrying with it the scent of smoke that mingled with the fog. Anna blinked, unsure if her vision was blurring from hunger or fear. A second ago, she believed she was walking toward her own execution. The next, she was staring at something beyond all understanding. The prison camp lay pale and colorless, like a photograph still half developed. Along the yard, long wooden tables had been set up, covered with worn but clean cloths. Upon them, great iron skillets sent up ribbons of steam, the smell of eggs, of meat, of toasted bread spreading through the cold air. She stopped. Her eyes widened. Her heart stumbled. This couldn't be a trick, but it couldn't be real either. Across the yard, an American man in a cotton apron, his hair blazing red like fire, was turning eggs with a wooden spoon. He turned, smiling, an easy, unguarded smile that seemed to come from another world. "Morning, ladies," he said. "Eggs are getting cold." The sound wasn't a command. There was no threat in it, only an invitation, light and casual, as if he were welcoming guests to breakfast at home. The women stood frozen. Ing swallowed hard, scanning for rifles, for soldiers, for anything that made more sense than this. But there was nothing, only the rising scent of coffee, thick and sweet in the morning air. Gertrude, the oldest of them all, whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling, "Is this humiliation before death?" No one answered, because that was what they all believed. They stood there like statues, watching the American men who weren't angry, weren't tense, weren't cruel. Some were laughing quietly, pouring coffee, talking among themselves. The clink of spoons against tin cups, the hiss of grease on a hot pan. It all sounded like the heartbeat of an ordinary morning they had thought the war had erased forever. Anna's head spun. Confusion rose inside her like a tide. She smelled the fried eggs, the same smell she hadn't known since 1942, when her mother was still alive in Dresden, when her family sat around a table and her father talked about Beethoven, not Hitler. And now that scent returned. Here, in the middle of war, in a prison camp, among enemies. A tall, broad-shouldered soldier with dark skin carried out a tray of toast. "Coffee's fresh," he said with a hint of humor in his voice. "Don't just stand there, ladies. Breakfast is the only battle you'll fight today." A few women gave out a stifled, broken laugh, the kind that bursts out when the mind can no longer bear contradiction. Anna remained still. Her whole body was drawn tight, trembling. Her senses betrayed her. Instead of fear, she felt something more dangerous. Hunger. Real hunger. Frida whispered beside her, Maybe this is how they break us. They feed us so we'll lose our strength." But even as she said it, her voice quavered as if she didn't believe herself. One of the Americans approached. He carried no weapon, only a coffee pot. "Would you like some?" he asked gently, enunciating each word slowly, afraid they wouldn't understand. No one replied. He sighed softly, then poured a cup for Ing and smiled. "Smells better than gunpowder, right?" A shiver ran down Anna's spine. The words, half jest, half truth, sounded like a message from another world, a world where people didn't have to kill each other to prove loyalty. Anna lifted her eyes to the sky. The first sunlight broke through the fog, striking the flagpole in the yard. The American flag flapped hard in the wind, its red and white stripes glinting against the wet, barbed wire. For the first time, she didn't see it as the enemy's symbol. She saw it as a sign of life. Gertrude reached out, trembling, to take a piece of bread. Her hands were dry and cracked, shaking beyond control. She bit into it, eyes closed. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell into her palm. Anna watched, her throat tightening painfully. Nearby, Elsa, the blonde nurse, stood silently, staring at the frying pan. Her eyes blurred, and then she began to weep. No sound, only tears darkening the coarse fabric of her prison shirt. Anna wanted to say something but couldn't. All sound seemed to fade away until there was only the hiss of eggs in the pan, the whisper of wind against wood, and the beating of hearts. The camp stood suspended between two worlds, one of the hell they carried inside, the other of a simple breakfast shared by men they had been taught to hate. She turned to look at the red-haired soldier, the first to smile at them. He was flipping a slice of ham, tilting his head slightly, speaking with an easy cheer. "My mama used to say no one can stay angry while cooking bacon." Then he looked up at them, his voice softer now. "Guess she was right." Anna didn't understand every word, but the sound of mama struck deep, a gentle syllable in the midst of a harsh morning. Frida covered her mouth. She wasn't crying from fear anymore, but from something more painful. The sudden realization that her enemy, too, had a mother. The feeling rippled through the line of prisoners. One by one, they seemed to wake from a long, cruel dream. Everything they had been taught, that Americans were savages, beasts, murderers, melted away in the smell of coffee and melted butter. Anna saw it in their eyes, the same thing she felt in her own soul, the disorientation of touching something too kind to believe. The red-haired soldier, later they would learn his name was Sergeant Harold Red McIntyre, set down his pan, brushed his hands off, and said quietly, "You don't have to be scared. Nobody's dying today." The words fell softly into the air, like a small stone cast into still water, and yet they broke open something deep inside every heart that heard them. Nobody's dying today. From that moment, fear dissolved into silence. A silence, alive with breath, with warmth, with the fragile weight of being human again. Anna bowed her head. A tear slid down her cheek, falling onto the cracked Texas earth. And in that instant she felt something strange and sacred. She was no longer a prisoner. She was simply human. And so were they. Texas sunlight spilled across the yard, melting the last veil of mist clinging to the barbed wire. The air carried a strange symphony of scents: coffee, butter, and smoked meat. So familiar, so foreign, that it almost drew tears. Anna walked slowly toward the wooden tables, her hands trembling, eyes darting about for the signs of a trap, for rifles, for orders, for the cold shape of death. But there was nothing. Only American soldiers, busy with small, impossible acts, slicing bread, pouring coffee, dividing portions. A young soldier with dark brown hair, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, placed a tin tray before her, 2 fried eggs, a golden slice of bread, and a strip of steaming bacon. He spoke softly, his voice rough from the chill of morning. "Eat while it's hot, ma'am." It wasn't an order nor mockery. It was simply a reminder, so plain, so human, that it made Anna's heart tighten. She said nothing. She only stared at the tray. The warmth rising from the food brushed her face like another kind of wind, the warmth of life itself. At the far end of the table, Frida lifted a piece of bread, sniffed it lightly, and broke down in tears. The smell of melted butter shattered her last defenses in a single breath. Her sobs spread softly, drawing out others. No one spoke. Only the faint sounds of weeping mixed with the gentle clatter of spoons against tin. Anna still hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on the bacon, something so heartbreakingly familiar. Its smell tore open a door in her memory. She was 8 again, in Dresden, at Christmas. Her mother stood by the coal stove, apron dusted with flour, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron pan. Outside, snow fell in silence. Inside, her father's voice filled the small kitchen. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. A holy, quiet night. She once thought that life would never end. Then came the war, and everything, the kitchen, the singing, the smell of home, was swallowed by fire. Now, here in Camp Hearn, among Americans, the scent returned. Not as food, as a message. You are still alive. Anna's hands trembled as she reached for the meat. The warmth of the fat melted beneath her fingertips. Tears slid down her cheeks, landing on the plate, mingling with the glistening oil. Nearby, the cook, Private Jack Thornton of Oklahoma, noticed she hadn't eaten. He hesitated, then bent down to her level. "Something wrong, ma'am?" Anna shook her head, trying to smile, but her lips refused to obey. Jack followed her gaze to the bacon, then spoke softly, voice calm as wind through grass. "Food's the same everywhere. War changes people, not breakfast." The words struck her like a forgotten hymn. Not philosophy, not pity, just truth. Simple, unvarnished truth from a man who had known hunger and hardship, and was trying, in his own quiet way, to keep decency alive inside the madness of war. Anna bowed her head. The piece of meat felt heavy as memory itself. She took a small bite, the salt, the smoke, the butter, all melting together, thick with the taste of loss. At the corner of the table, Inga, the nurse from Munich, was breaking her bread in half, sharing it with the woman beside her. Her hands were clumsy, but her eyes were soft. For the first time in years, they no longer reflected fear, but gratitude. Corporal Hall, the night guard from before, passed by. He looked at them, nodded slightly, and kept walking. No one spoke. No one smiled. But something had shifted, not in the camp, but in the souls of those who had been taught that the enemy is a monster. Anna looked around. The women were eating quietly, each one moving with the reverence of someone partaking in a ritual. The soft clang of utensils echoed through the yard, not the sound of imprisonment, but the rhythm of life returning. Above them, the sunlight turned pale gold. The wind carried the smell of dry grass, the distant lowing of cattle. For a fleeting moment, everything became ordinary again. Life itself rediscovered. A soldier came by with a pot of coffee filling Anna's cup. She stared at the dark liquid, the steam curling upward. Her hands trembled. "Don't worry," he said with a grin. "It's not poison, unless you hate Texas coffee." Anna let out a small laugh. Fragile, unfamiliar, but hers. For the first time since capture, she heard the sound of her own laughter. No contempt, no command, just human to human, in a morning too absurd and too beautiful to be denied. Frida murmured softly in German, "Vielleicht sind sie nicht Monster." Perhaps. They are not monsters. The words landed gently, like a confession. Anna felt something stir inside her, a small, trembling wish to believe. Jack Thornton, after making sure every woman had food, returned to the stove. He wiped his hands on his apron and glanced up at the sky. He didn't know it, but 27 German women were watching him. The young soldier with the frying pan, seeing in him a fragment of humanity that war had failed to kill. Anna laid her fork down, looking around the table. Someone was praying. Someone else smiled faintly. She didn't know what to call this feeling. Not joy, not gratitude, but a kind of stillness, as fragile as the first morning after a storm. Overhead, a flock of birds descended onto the fence. Some perched gently on the barbed wire, swaying in the light. Anna watched them, thinking, if only the world could stay this peaceful, just for one day. Jack came back, sitting at the edge of the table, coffee cup in hand. "You know," he said quietly, "my mama used to say, a full belly makes a softer heart." He smiled, and his eyes, no longer those of a guard, were the eyes of a neighbor. Anna nodded slightly. She didn't understand every word, but she understood enough. She looked around once more. Women eating, drinking, breathing. Not prisoners anymore. In that moment, there were no fences, no flags, no sides. Only people sharing breakfast beneath the Texas sun. And then, as if from a distant narrator, the voice of reflection. They came to that yard expecting to die. But what died that morning was something else. Their hatred. The Texas sun had risen fully now, laying its golden light across the wooden tables. The coffee in the cups was growing cold. The steam from the pans had long since faded into the air. Yet no one in the yard at Camp Hearn wanted to move. It was no longer just breakfast. It had become something larger, a stillness so deep that one could hear the wind brushing the barbed wire, the faint clink of metal spoons, and the uneven breathing of people who had been forbidden, for far too long, to be weak. Anna set her cup down. The warmth was gone, but the taste lingered in her throat, a sweetness that made her heart tremble with something close to pain. She looked around at the faces she had lived beside for months. Ing, Frida, Gertrude, Elsa. They had once been soldiers, women wrapped in discipline like armor, believing in order, in strength. But now the armor was gone, and all that remained were the faces of human beings quietly falling apart. Frida was the first to speak, her voice cracked, barely a whisper. "They're mocking us." Then she bit into a small piece of bread and began to cry. The words broke in the air, unanswered, because after them came the sound of more weeping, at first scattered, then growing, the restrained kind, quiet but unstoppable, as if each woman were letting part of her soul dissolve into the smell of butter and smoke. Ing buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Gertrude clutched her cross, tears falling onto her wrinkled hand and the half-eaten bread below it. Elsa bit her lip until it bled, trying to swallow the tears that refused to stay down. Anna watched them and understood. No one was being mocked. No one was being humiliated. What they could not bear was kindness. For years they had been taught that the enemy was a monster, a beast, a creature without a heart. They had been fed on slogans, on hate, on the proud illusion of superiority. But now, a single strip of bacon, a cup of coffee, a smile, had undone it all. Anna dropped her spoon. Her voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "Wir waren die Hungrigen." Then again, slower, clearer, like a confession. "We were the hungry ones." The others looked up. No one needed to ask what she meant. They understood it wasn't hunger of the body she spoke of, but hunger of the soul. The kind that comes from living too long in darkness, from being fed lies and robbed of the simplest sight of all, human kindness. Anna bent her head to the table. The world seemed to spin. In her mind, she saw her mother's face again, gentle, tired, the voice soft as breath. Don't ever let the war make you forget to be human. She had forgotten. All of them had. She began to cry, quietly, but enough that the soldier nearby noticed. Jack Thornton, the man who had served her breakfast, paused, the ladle still in his hand. He watched the German women crying over the meal he'd cooked, bewildered. He couldn't understand, not fully, but he sensed. Something immense had shifted. He stepped closer, set down his ladle, and said softly, half in jest, half in truth, "Guess hunger sounds the same in every language." Anna looked up, tears clinging to her chin. The words drew a faint, trembling laugh from her, half sob, half relief. Frida nodded through her tears. Yes, hunger, and maybe mercy too. The soldier smiled and nodded slowly. The imagined camera would have panned then, across faces glistening with tears, across eyes that no longer belonged to enemies, but to people awakening from a long night of hatred. In the Texas light, everything softened. The silver in Gertrude's hair, the blue in Inga's eyes, the quiet smile on Jack's face, all merging into a single picture, the rediscovery of compassion. Some of the prisoners pressed bits of their bread into the soldiers' hands. "Für dich," they murmured. "For you." Jack shook his head, trying to refuse, but they insisted. Not out of gratitude, but out of a need to give something back, to restore balance to the storm inside them. Anna wiped her cheeks and looked around. The women were speaking softly in German, their voices fragile but unafraid. And she realized something she had never felt since the war began. They were speaking as free people. Freedom, not because the gates had opened, but because fear had left them. For that moment, war seemed impossibly far away, like something from another lifetime. Jack stood a while longer watching them. Then he turned toward the kitchen. Just before stepping inside, he murmured to himself, "I wish my mama could see this." Anna didn't understand every word, but she heard the tenderness in his tone, a sadness mixed with pride and mercy. She watched his silhouette fade into the drifting smoke, and somewhere deep inside her, something broke open. And within that broken place, something new began to grow. No one in the yard at Camp Hearn understood why the women were weeping like that. The American soldiers simply stood there, silent, uneasy, watching the group of German prisoners sobbing around the breakfast tables, as if the world had quietly turned upside down and no one had been told. But to understand those tears, one must go back, months earlier, across the ocean, through the smoke of Normandy, and into the web of lies planted in their minds when they were still young. Anna Weiss, Inga, Frieda, Gertrude, and 23 other women, once part of the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe. They had been Helferinnen, clerks, nurses, radio operators, signal technicians. They never carried rifles, yet they were cogs in the vast machinery of the Third Reich. They were chosen for their discipline, loyalty, and unshakable faith in Germany. Faith that Hitler was light itself, that the Americans were savages, brutes, mongrels, and butchers, barbaric half-breeds without honor or civilization. Since 1941, every propaganda session began with the same warning. If captured by Americans, you will be tortured, violated, or worse, forgotten. Anna had believed it, not only because she was told to, but because belief was the only armor one could wear in the chaos of war. But when Normandy collapsed in the summer of 1944, when the German divisions shattered under the roar of artillery and Sherman tanks, her certainties began to crack. She was captured at Caen. She remembered that morning clearly. Wet sand, the reek of gunpowder, and a young American soldier leaning down, saying quietly, "You're safe now." Safe. It was a word she had never imagined hearing from the enemy's mouth. From that moment, her journey began. The prisoner convoys rolled through the French countryside, then to the port of Cherbourg. Aboard a Liberty ship bound for the Atlantic, 27 German women sat huddled below deck, listening to the waves pounding against iron. No one knew where they were headed. "America," someone whispered. And silence fell. That name felt like fate. Not a place, but a symbol of the final enemy. For 16 days at sea they waited, for beatings, starvation, humiliation. But when they landed at Newport News, Virginia, the first things they received were clean water and bread. An American soldier tossed them wool blankets and a sack of apples. No one dared to touch them. Anna remembered Inga whispering, "They want to poison us first." But there was no poison. No rifle butts, no shouting, only the calm voice of a woman from the Red Cross, speaking broken German. "Welcome, ladies. You will be treated under the Geneva Convention." Geneva Convention. 2 words they had heard before, but always as Western propaganda. Germany had signed it too, but none of them had ever believed it was real. As the train carried them south, through Kansas fields the color of wheat, past the winding Mississippi, they began to see things they could not comprehend. The guards were not brutal. Meals arrived on time. No one starved. No one was beaten. It was this very kindness that frightened them most. A deeper, quieter fear, because kindness had no logic in war. Frida would later write in her diary, found years afterward in Munich, "The guards smile. They say good morning. It is worse than shouting, because I do not know what they want." They did not understand that the Americans wanted nothing. In America, humane treatment of prisoners was not weakness. It was moral strength, an invisible weapon sharper than any gun. Texas, where they were sent, was unlike anything they knew. Not a prison, not a labor camp. Camp Hearn was a small town. Wooden barracks, a mess hall, a library, an infirmary, even a baseball field. A place so ordinary it made them uneasy. Every morning the Texan guards greeted them with a "morning." Every week there were full meals, soap, medicine. When one woman caught a fever, a U.S. nurse brought her medicine. When they worked in the fields, local farmers taught them how to tie rope, how to drive a truck, how to avoid rattlesnakes. Still, they waited for the mask to fall, for the blow, the interrogation, the proof that the world still made sense, that the Americans were exactly what Germany had said they were. But that day never came. And so, on this strange morning, when the smell of bacon drifted through the Texas fog, they finally understood that what imprisoned them was not barbed wire, nor rifles, nor orders. It was the unbearable weight of compassion. Anna once remembered a Wehrmacht instructor in Potsdam telling her, "Victory isn't only won with guns, it's won by making your enemy doubt his own humanity." Now, in Herne, that sentence returned to her. Only this time, the one making her doubt was America, not Germany. That morning, as she sat before her plate of eggs and bacon, every belief she had ever been taught crumbled in silence. She realized that if Germany had built its war upon hatred, America was winning upon mercy. Not on the battlefield, but in the souls of those who had once been called its enemies. The Texas sun had softened. No longer the fierce gold of morning, it had turned pale and tired, as though it too had grown weary after witnessing so much that defied human reason. The tables were nearly bare now. Only crumbs of bread, stains of dried coffee, and faint wisps of steam dissolving into the still air. Anna sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. The trembling within her remained, but it was no longer born of fear. It was something else, something she had no word for, a trembling made of awe, of confusion, a feeling too deeply after having felt nothing for too long. At the far end of the yard, the Americans were cleaning up. They spoke softly, their laughter low and worn. No one seemed triumphant, no one proud, just men, working, carefully, methodically, almost peacefully. In that moment, Anna realized something that unsettled her more than anything else. They didn't see her as an enemy, and that somehow was the hardest thing to bear. A voice came from behind her. She turned. A woman in a WAC uniform, the Women's Army Corps, was walking toward her, a coffee pot in hand. Her face was sun-browned. A few strands of brown hair had slipped loose from her cap, and her eyes were steady and clear, filled not with judgment, but with the quiet fatigue of someone who had seen too much and kept going anyway. Anna didn't know why she couldn't look away. Maybe because it had been so long since she had seen a woman who wasn't afraid, who still carried her dignity like something unbroken. The American gave a small nod and asked, with a tired smile, "Refill?" Anna nodded, gently pushing her cup forward. The woman poured slowly, carefully, afraid to spill. Steam rose between them. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Nothing was said. There was no hatred, only a shared exhaustion, something beyond language or borders. In that instant, Anna felt the line between them dissolve. She could have been me. I could have been her. The thought came unbidden, as if whispered by a voice inside her. The wax smiled, a small, real, weary smile, and slipped a tiny paper packet from her pocket, placing it on the table. "You'll need sugar," she said. "Texas mornings are bitter." Anna stared at it as if it were a treasure. In her Germany, sugar had vanished 2 years ago, something that lived only in memory and dreams. She touched the packet, feeling the rough paper, the faint texture of the granules beneath her fingers, and her eyes stung with tears. That one simple gesture, meant as kindness, maybe even humor, shattered the last invisible wall in her mind. There were no winners and losers now, only 2 women from opposite ends of the same war, both of them tired, both having lost too much, both learning, painfully, how to be human again. Anna looked closer. She saw the dark circles beneath the American's eyes, the calluses on her fingers, the worn stitching on her collar, all familiar signs, the marks of someone who had lived too long in a world of men and weapons. Anna wanted to speak, but her throat locked. The wax seemed to understand, by instinct. She only nodded, turned, and began to walk away, the coffee pot still steaming in her hand. Just before she left, she glanced back over her shoulder and said softly, almost to herself, "Take care of yourself, honey." The word honey fell gently into the air, light as sunlight, a fragment of tenderness drifting through the ruins of a storm. Anna sat motionless. The word echoed inside her, again and again, like music from a language that didn't belong to war. She had never heard an American speak to her like that, without contempt, without irony, with nothing but compassion. She thought of Hilda, her closest friend from the Signal Corps, the girl who had died under British bombs in Caen. Hilda had once said, on a cold night, "If we'd been born somewhere else, maybe we could have been friends with them." Now that thought returned, alive, clear, and truer than ever. Anna understood then. All of them, soldiers, prisoners, nurses, victors, defeated, were only mirrors, reflecting fragments of one another. War makes us see the worst of ourselves in the enemy. But mercy lets us see what is best, and what we've forgotten. From somewhere beyond the yard, a harmonica began to play. Home on the range. The melody drifted over the fence across the quiet yard into the ears of the silent prisoners. Anna listened, closing her eyes. The old fear inside her dissolved, replaced by something new, light as breath, warm as sunlight. She opened the sugar packet, poured it into her coffee, stirred. The granules melted slowly, shimmering like fragments of memory dissolving into truth. She smiled, a small, fragile smile, one she did not even realize she had. Across the yard, the whack turned back once, gave a brief nod, and walked on. The Texas sun had begun to lean westward, its color fading from brilliance to something softer, gentler, as if even the light itself had grown weary after a morning that had seen too much of what human reason could not explain. The breakfast tables were nearly bare now. A few crumbs of bread, stains of dried coffee, and the faint trace of smoke that drifted upward and disappeared. Anna sat still, her hands folded in her lap. The trembling in her body lingered, but not from fear. It came from something unnamed, a quiet trembling born of tenderness, of awakening, of the ache that follows revelation. Across the yard, the American soldiers were tidying up. They spoke in low voices, laughter soft and worn at the edges. No one looked victorious. No one seemed proud, just men, working with patient, ordinary care. And in that ordinary care, Anna saw something that unbalanced her completely. They did not see her as an enemy, and that, somehow, was what disarmed her most. A light breeze passed through, carrying the smell of butter, coffee, and dry soil, an earthy fragrance so peaceful it felt almost impossible in a world still burning on the other side of the ocean. Around her, the other women had begun to move. Ing gathered the trays. Frida wiped the tables. Gertrude carefully stacked the spoons, still slick with grease. No one told them to. No one ordered. They simply worked, as though this small act of helping could repay the kindness that had broken something open inside them. A soldier passing by raised an eyebrow, smiling. "Didn't expect y'all to volunteer." Gertrude, who spoke no English, bowed her head slightly and murmured in German, "Es ist das Mindeste." "It is the least we can do." Anna watched her, feeling something shift deep within, a sense of shedding a shell she hadn't known she wore. Only hours ago, they had believed they would die by the hands of their captors. Now they were cleaning tables, trading quiet words with the guards like neighbors at the end of a long day. A young blond soldier approached, his shirt sleeves rolled, a stack of tin plates in his arms. "Could use some help with these, ma'am." Anna nodded and took a few from him. They worked side by side in silence, the clink of metal soft in the still noon air. After a while, she looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you kind to us?" He paused, surprised, then met her eyes. There was no superiority there, no pity, only the tired calm of someone who had seen too much death. "Because cruelty's the easy part," he said quietly. "My mom raised me better." Anna said nothing. The words fell between them like a pebble dropped in still water, sending ripples through her mind long after the sound had faded. Somewhere inside her, something old and hard began to loosen. Belief. And then the unseen voice of reflection rose again, slow and low, like wind moving across a prairie. For the first time, they learned that mercy requires strength, that kindness in war is not weakness, but resistance. In the mess tent, the sounds of ordinary life returned, running water, clinking cups, laughter broken by accents of English and German, mispronounced but sincere. The words didn't always make sense, but kindness didn't need translation. Frida was trying to teach a soldier how to say danke. He grinned, mispronouncing it hopelessly. "Donkey!" Laughter broke out. A light, free laughter, the kind war had been trying to crush for years. Anna smiled, and for the first time in many months she didn't feel guilty for feeling joy. The day moved slowly. The sky turned pale blue, its reflection shimmering in the puddles from the washing tubs. Jack Thornton, the cook, still wore his stained apron. He set a basin of clean water on the table and patted Anna's shoulder. "You don't have to do this, you know." Anna shook her head gently. "We want to." Jack chuckled. "Guess work looks different when no one's yelling orders." The words struck her like memory. She thought of mornings back in the barracks where orders were shouted like whips. Here, no one shouted, no one feared, and yet the work still got done, and done well. She realized then, true freedom wasn't doing what everyone wanted. It was being able to do what was right, without fear. A few minutes later, Inge asked Jack in broken English, "You not hate Germans?" Jack shook his head, wiping his hands on his apron. "No, ma'am. Hate's a luxury. We can't afford it if we want peace." His words settled over them, quiet but heavy. Inside each of the German women, something shifted, a truth both raw and beautiful. If war is where people learn to justify hate, then peace begins when they stop looking for reasons not to love. When the work was done, the tables gleamed again. The dishes were stacked neatly, as if breakfast had never happened. And yet none of them wanted to return to the barracks. They knew, each of them, that if they walked through that door, they would not be the same women who had entered it. Anna looked across the yard. The wax soldier was putting away the coffee pot. The guard was coiling a rope. Jack was folding his apron. All of it formed a picture she hadn't believed could exist. A world where decency was not a luxury, but a way of being. She walked toward Jack and asked softly, her voice trembling but sure, "When the war ends, will you remember this day?" Jack looked at her, his eyes kind. "Ma'am," he said, "some days don't need remembering. They just stay." Anna lowered her gaze. In that moment, she no longer felt like a prisoner of war, but a prisoner of kindness, the only captivity she would never wish to escape. By late afternoon, after the morning had faded like a dream, Camp Hearn slipped back into its familiar rhythm. The wind carried the lowing of cattle from the distant fields, the thud of hammers against wood, the faint hum of jazz drifting from a soldier's radio. But inside the wooden barracks, something had changed forever. There were no more suspicious glances when the guards passed by. No more whispered talk about the hour of execution. Only faraway looks, quiet faces, women lost in thought, thinking of breakfast, of butter, of a smile, of words that needed no translation. Anna sat at a small table, a thin sheet of paper before her, a dull pencil in hand. For the first time since her capture, she was allowed to write home. On the table lay a Red Cross form, 25 lines, 200 words at most, every message to be censored. No talk of war, of politics, of camp life. But Anna had no wish to write about war. She wanted to write about breakfast. She sat for a long time before beginning, her handwriting slanted, small, trembling but resolute. Liebe Mutter, Sie haben uns nicht verletzt. Die Amerikaner gaben uns Speck und Eier. Sie behandeln uns wie Menschen. Dearest Mother, they did not harm us. The Americans gave us bacon and eggs. They treat us like human beings. She stopped. Read it again. Tears blurred the words. That last one, mention, human beings, suddenly felt holier than any word she had ever written. Because for years she had lived without remembering what it meant to be one. Across the compound, Inge was writing, too. Her letter was shorter, almost childlike. They did not shoot us. They gave us breakfast. That was all. No explanation, no subtext. But when the censors reviewed it, only one line remained. They did not shoot us. The rest was blacked out with thick ink. Yet, like all truths too powerful to erase, it survived in whispers. Rumors spread through the camp. Someone said Inge had written about the breakfast. Soon, prisoners began repeating her words like a quiet creed of hope. They did not shoot us. They gave us breakfast. The phrase slipped past the fences, carried by rumor and memory, finding its way to other POW camps in Kansas, Louisiana, Arizona. Each time it was spoken, it gathered new meaning. It was no longer about food. It was about humanity. In the weeks that followed, when trucks carried the prisoners out to the fields, they began to hum old German songs, Lily Marleen, Kein Schöner Land. The American guards heard them and did not stop them. Sometimes one or two even whistled along. A fragile peace began to thread its way through the camp, weaving between barbed wire and watchtowers, a small, stubborn miracle of a world learning to breathe again. Jack Thornton kept cooking each morning. When the women passed the kitchen, he'd grin and wave. "Don't worry, no bacon today, all gone," he'd call out. They'd laugh and answer in broken English. "Thank you, Jack." These little exchanges, awkward, clumsy, genuine, became the invisible bridge between them. No speeches, no ideology, just the repetition of simple, human decency. One evening in early July, Anna sat by the barrack door watching the Texas sunset, a red coin rolling down behind the trees. From inside, she heard Inge's soft voice reading her censored letter aloud to the others, as if telling a fairy tale. "They did not shoot us. They gave us breakfast." The room grew quiet. Some women smiled faintly, others wiped at their eyes. The sentence no longer sounded like a statement. It had become a prayer. Anna looked up at the sky. Somewhere across the ocean, she imagined her mother looking up at the same vast blue above a city broken by bombs. If the letter reached her, the old woman would read that one surviving line: "The Americans treat us like human beings." And maybe, for the first time in years, she would believe the world had not entirely lost its soul. By the end of summer, the walls of propaganda had crumbled completely. No lectures, no slogans, no talk of democracy or freedom had done it. Just one breakfast, eggs, bacon, coffee, and mercy, had taught them what 10 years of ideology could not. One morning, as Jack Thornton passed by the yard, Anna stopped him and gave a small salute. He smiled. "Writing more letters home?" She nodded. "Yes, about breakfast again." Jack chuckled. "Guess that was one hell of a meal, huh?" Anna looked at him, her voice soft as the breeze. "Yes, it was the first meal of my life." When the letters left Texas, crossing the ocean, drifting back toward a ruined Europe, the war was already dying. The bombs had stopped, but the cities still burned. The Reich had fallen, but the walls inside the human soul had not. And in a small camp on the Texas prairie, 27 German women still lived, worked, and slowly relearned something that war had almost erased: how to believe in kindness. In the autumn of 1945, news came over the camp radio. When the American announcer declared, "Germany has surrendered unconditionally," no one cheered, no one cried. They only looked at one another, quiet, hollow-eyed, as people who had walked a very long road and finally reached the end of a belief. Everything they had once served, worshipped, and sacrificed for had turned to ash. That day, Anna stood behind the mess hall, the same spot where she had once received her first breakfast as a prisoner. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney. The smell of eggs and coffee drifted through the warm Texas air. But she was no longer the trembling captive of that first morning. She stood straight now, watching the sky, where birds crossed above the barbed wire she had once thought of as her cage. Now it seemed only a faint line, so thin that even the wind could erase it. Jack Thornton, the cook, came out holding a tin cup. "Morning, Anna." She smiled, replying in English now, fluent and steady. "Good morning, Jack." No words were needed after that. The look between them said everything. A thank you too deep for speech. A year later, in October 1946, orders came for the prisoners' repatriation. The Texas sky was bright that morning, wind rolling through dry grass and red dust. Jack stood by the fence watching the women climb aboard the trucks. When the engines rumbled to life, Anna turned and raised her hand in farewell. Jack touched his cap and nodded. They never saw each other again. But sometimes a single moment stays forever. because it marks the instant when a person becomes something more than their fear. Wars do not end when the guns go silent. They end when those who survive decide what kind of humans they will be next. Years later, Anna returned to Dresden. The city was nothing but blackened bricks and cold smoke. The houses she had known were gone. The streets turned into graveyards of memory. She survived, but carried a wound invisible to others, the wound of awareness. In the years of hunger that followed, when people fought over a crust of bread, Anna often remembered Texas, the place where her enemy had once fed her, not out of pity, but out of respect. Whenever she smelled frying eggs, she saw again that morning light. Whenever someone spoke of national greatness, she heard Jack's quiet voice. Cruelty's the easy part. One morning in 1953, her little daughter Liesel asked, "Mama, what is war?" Anna answered simply, "It's when people forget they were ever the same." Time passed. The women of Herne scattered, some to Canada, some back to Germany, fading into the anonymity of peacetime. But their letters, those thin Red Cross forms written in pencil, were kept like relics. In the small museum at Herne, Texas, a copy of one remains. The paper has yellowed, the handwriting faded, but one line is still clear. They did not shoot us. They gave us breakfast. Visitors pause before it for a long time, not because it is heroic, but because it is so human. It does not speak of victory. It speaks of what victory can never touch, the stubborn endurance of decency. In 1968, in a modest Hamburg apartment, Anna told the story to her grown daughter. Outside, the city glowed with new light. Anna sipped her tea, her voice as soft as dusk. War taught me fear, but that morning in Texas taught me shame and grace. Her daughter was silent for a long while. Then softly, "Shame, Mama?" Anna smiled faintly. "Yes, because I realized we were wrong. We were taught to see monsters, but that morning I saw men, and I saw mercy, and mercy," she paused, "is the hardest thing to live with." By 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, Anna was nearly 70. She sat on her porch listening to the radio announce, "Heute sind wir wieder eins." Today we are one again. She smiled gently and whispered to herself, "We were never one. Not until we learned to be kind." On the table beside her lay an old faded photograph. 27 German women in prison uniforms standing beneath the Texas sun, and one red-haired American soldier smiling among them. On the back, written in trembling German script, "Sie haben uns nicht erschossen. Sie gaben uns Frühstück." They did not shoot us, they gave us breakfast. And beneath it, a final reflection, perhaps Anna's own, perhaps the world's. It began with fear and ended with faith. Not faith in flags or armies, but in something older, stronger, harder to kill. Mercy. Because in the end, every war will fade, every empire will crumble, and every name will be forgotten. But somewhere, a stranger will still offer another human being a warm meal. And that, more than any victory, is how humanity survives.